Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Systems and Power podcast. I'm your host, Moses Parente. Today, we have a very special guest. He is the CEO and founder of the Affila Group and the Affila Technology Company. Please welcome CEO Andres Pazmino. Thank you so much for joining.
Good morning, Moses. Thanks for having me.
Now, thank you so much for coming. I really do appreciate it. How's your week been so far?
Very busy, even though it's August of 2026 and it tends to be a little slower,
No,
but we
it's all good. It's
certainly
all
are
good.
quite busy. But yeah, looking forward to the rest of the year once, September comes here, because I'm sure it's going to get even busier.
That's all good. I know we're all pretty busy. If you don't mind me asking, if you could explain to the audience like what the Affila Group and what Technology does, so that way they can get more insights into what you do.
Yeah, well, Fila Group is the parent company of a few companies, and it focuses on technology, politics, and business consulting. And Affila Technology specifically is a cybersecurity and AI and advanced technologies firm sitting at the intersection of technology and organizations and government organizations like nonprofits or private organizations. And we focus a lot on technology policy, risk mitigation, how AI and emerging technologies can bring secure, tangible efficiency gains to the operations of organizations, whether that's nonprofits or government or private organizations at any size and any scale. So that has been the focus so far, and it's been working out very well.
Nice, nice. One thing that I definitely found very interesting about your background was that of course, I know you first started off with the Garcia for mayor campaign. How was that like serving on a mayoral campaign? Because especially in New York City, that's a large scale event, especially with the Democratic primaries and happening and all that, with so many candidates always going against each other. How is it like serving in a mayor campaign?
Yeah, so I've been, other than technology and cybersecurity altogether, and most recently AI, uh, ever since AI became more mainstream. Other than that focus, I've always been involved in politics, and I've been lobbying on behalf of many organizations, mostly nonprofits, on passing laws, tweaking laws, securing public funding for these nonprofit organizations that actually offer services to the community. So, and this is 2021, a year after the pandemic, and I was running Catherine Garcia's political campaign, if you will, not the entire mayoral campaign, but the political department of the campaign, and it was citywide. And how was it? It was very, very exciting moment because, we were just kind of getting out of the pandemic. There was a transition from two terms from De Blasio to the next mayor that eventually would have been, well, eventually was Eric Adams. We ended up actually not winning by 7,000 votes. That was a razor thin, uh, difference between the first place and the second place. So, speaking to, New Yorkers of all walk of life, really understanding how they are, how do they feel living in New York City, through the pandemic time. And at the same time, just really meeting and building relationship with all sort of people, and this is a very exciting city with 8.5 million people where, you have folks with very different backgrounds, very different point of view. And I just thought I had a lot of fun, even though it was just a few months of campaign, but also very intense too. I remember having very little sleep, especially when you're getting closer to election day. And then after that, everything just it slowed down considerably. So it definitely it was a very amazing experience, and I definitely recommend folks who have not been part of a campaign, doesn't have to be mayoral, but any sort of political campaign, you should give it a try because it's a very exciting time.
Okay. I definitely agree with that. Everyone should at least serve on a campaign at least once. Last year, for the local elections, I was involved in the Phil Wong campaign for New York City Council District 30. That was actually really fun, especially when we were on primary night, which luckily Phil Wong got the victory, so that was fun. And one thing that and you also came from Ecuador to New York City. Many of our audience listeners are actually they do come from an immigrant background. So I would love it if you could, if you're willing to, of course, if you could dive in a little bit deep into you coming to New York City from Ecuador.
Yeah, I mean, I came to the United States. I was very young, and I went to a CUNY school,
Awesome.
Hunter College. So a CUNY student all the way. I ended up going also to Baruch College. So I did my undergrad at Hunter College in political science, and I did my MPA, Master in Public Administration, at Baruch, while at the same time really pursuing, certifications and, other education on the technology side. So it was always a combination of the two.
Mm. Did he, what in terms of your I guess going from lobbying and government relations to eventually launching the Affila technology, how was that transition period like?
How was that transition period
Yeah,
like?
like how I
To
guess
me, it
how
was
I'm
very
sorry.
natural.
Mm.
It was very natural, because there is always been, the interest has always been there. The need from folks has always been there. And it was just making a decision. And the decision was, well, we've been doing a lot of politics. We've been studying technology and we've been involved in technology in different ways. Let's just formalize it. And that's how Affila Technology came about. And we started as a cybersecurity firm, and advanced technologies. And with that, I mean, cloud infrastructure and, technologies that will be emerging. And shortly after, you have ChatGPT that came mainstream at the end of 2022. And shortly after, then you have Claude coming in and all these new LLMs that most people use on a daily basis now. So things just natural and organically came together.
Mm. Do you think your I guess like since you were working in government relations and lobbying at the time, do you think that I guess because one of the things that I've definitely learned about the world of politics and government is that a lot of things are largely relationship based, and I would imagine that during that time you were able to just build a large list of relations with a lot of people who were like running small businesses and seeing cybersecurity, how much it was needed back then. Would you say that was the case? Like, as you got to expand your relationships in New York City and you saw the need for cybersecurity becoming more and more prevalent, especially after the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity has always been prevalent in with the presence of AI more so now. And in New York City and anywhere, the need is there. But it's such a paradox because a lot of folks don't feel that they need cybersecurity, whether you're an individual or a business. And, when they actually need cybersecurity is as a reaction to an incident that it happened. So more than actually approaching technology from the technical point of view through building an API or putting together a line of code or running a scan or anything, I actually love to approach technology in a way, in a more human matter. Like for instance, when we're talking about, do you know that cybersecurity means that you should have a unique password manager, where your password, rather than a password, should be a passphrase of at least 16 digits, if you will, with alphanumeric, composition. You don't need to know how to code, or you don't need to know how to really put something technical together. That's just regular psychology. And cybersecurity, a lot of that is psychology. So when a cyber criminal is trying to get your information and that person is on the phone, they try to hurry you and to insert, urgency in the conversation, because they know that psychologically you don't get to the chance to really think and assess things very quickly when you are in an urgency. So they use a lot of psychology. So certainly, once you provide that education, and this is for me key, education awareness is everything in cybersecurity.
I definitely love the fact that you brought up that a lot of cybersecurity nowadays is largely reactionary, and it's a very unfortunate thing that's happening in even at even in the Fortune 500 company level, and especially in terms of like events like ransomware or data theft or and you see a lot of people, even going at the top of corporate America, you see that cybersecurity is largely seen as a business expense rather than an investment. And they largely see it as a way of, oh, it's too expensive. I don't want to invest in it right now. There's other things that they want to prioritize. And it's only a matter of time until it and they only prioritize it until it's too late. That was one thing that I did when I was that I learned back when I was doing a lot of cybersecurity case study competitions back when I was in college, and that idea has always stuck with me because even like when you're going from like companies that are large or even small, cybersecurity is always seen as a business expense, not necessarily an investment. And it only becomes something to actually start caring about until it's way too late. Like worst case scenario, a hacker stole a bunch of their data and is demanding like 1 million in Bitcoin, and we see that happen way too often, and that's just a very unfortunate thing that happens with businesses nowadays. How do you what's your thoughts on, I guess, approaching businesses that are, whether large or small, in terms of how should people offering cybersecurity services better approach, like, hey, look, listen, this is not just something like an expense. This is something that is actually an investment, because at least like one thing that I learned, you can never spend too much on cybersecurity. You can never. And the way how that's one thing I definitely wanted to get your a bit more of your perspective on like how do you approach businesses, whether large or small, into making sure that they make the necessary investments to secure their data and their company.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, cybersecurity, a lot of that is also psychology. And with that, you also have, efficiencies. When you have a defined roles for an cyber incident, or when you have a defined, drill and roles and responsibilities actually for folks during a, incident, that in of itself, when people know about the roles and the responsibilities, is efficiency. And with that, that's an investment, not necessarily an expense. In 2026, the question is is no longer, let me say this again. In 2026, the question isn't if you will be hacked, but rather is whether you'll even notice if it happened to you. And a lot of that has to do with AI and technologies that have been able to expedite the the operations of hacking. I was just reading a very interesting report that is actually published by Verizon. It's called the Data Breach Investigation Report, DBIR, in which they mention, and this is a very important report in the industry, where vulnerability exploitation has now taken over credential theft. And credential theft is just your traditional stealing somebody's and username and password and accessing their accounts, in an unauthorized fashion. Vulnerability exploitation nowadays is when they just the hackers just identify a bug or a vulnerability on the software, and then they're able to access the software without permission. And with that, it's interesting to see how vulnerability hasn't been exploited. If a vulnerability hasn't been exploited in 30 days, the statistical probability to be exploited against you falls considerably. And the reason why that's happened, and this is a fun fact when you think about it, is like cyber criminals are also running a business, you know, and they have limited resources, they have limited budgets, and when you have vulnerabilities that have been around in the wild much longer, it will cost you more, running the server, you know, than actually taking advantage of a newly open vulnerability out there. So you also have to understand that the vast majority of hacking has a financial incentive. And when you understand that perspective, hackers will be behaving accordingly.
Hmm. That's actually really really interesting, and especially as of course New York City is the largest is basically like the financial capital of the country. What would you say that New York City needs to do as a whole to make sure that we remain safe and that the government prioritizes digital safety for its citizens?
Well, I oftentimes say education and awareness are the best, way to counter cyber criminals and illicit activities through the internet. Because if you again know that having an MFA, multi-factor authentication, uh, really stops the vast majority of unauthorized access, that is a very easy thing to do. But then when folks don't value MFA for whatever reason, then that's when things, your attack surface continue to increase and vulnerability continues to keep people vulnerable. So education and awareness are the same thing. And I would like even say, passing laws and regulations are very important. But passing laws and regulations are as equally important as educating and awareness. And that could happen in schools, that could happen in universities, that could happen, in any sort of environment where people are congregating. So they begin to have and develop a more cybersecurity, educated mindset, and it becomes more of a mindset as opposed to an afterthought. And I think that's the issue too, right? When it comes down to any sort of technology, I oftentimes say to people, you know, nowadays the vast majority of people will operate with the implicit, anticipation and understanding that if they need to access their email, they're going to do it through their phones, right?
Hmm.
The vast majority of people have their own smartphone. 20 years ago, before the iPhone was around, you know, and even after the iPhone came out in 2007, the first few years, the thinking was, well, if I need to access my email, I have to find a desktop. I have to find a laptop to access my email. Made sense at the time, even though the iPhone has just been, has just arrived. Now It's just second nature. Oh, I need to access my email. Let me just grab my phone. So it's part of the mindset. So I always keep saying that technology is more about mindset than the actually technology. And therefore, technology, cybersecurity is more about a human, it's more human, and it has human issues more so than just technological issues. You
So
forgot to put a password, an alphanumeric password of 16 digits minimum. That wasn't the computer telling you. It's because you forgot about it, right? So again, it's a human issue more than a technological issue.
So it all goes back to when you were saying that security is basically all psychology. It's having that, I guess, that shift in a mindset to make sure that you're vigilant about being aware of making sure that you're taking these certain security measures to keep. And I know a lot of people think that this it sounds basic, very basic, but it's all about being vigilant and aware of what you're doing to making sure that your data and everything is just overall largely secured. And it could even be as simple as something like multi-factor authentication.
Exactly. Multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, use a password manager. Those things you don't need a cybersecurity degree to understand what cybersecurity is, right? Being aware that if you're receiving a unsolicited email, to really observe around the email to find for signs that it's not a phishing email. Or the same happens, by text. I don't know if you have gotten, more so now, a random text message of somebody you don't have on your phone saying, "Hey, I'll see you today at a coffee shop at 3 o'clock as we agreed." Have you gotten messages of that nature? Or,
Unfortunately.
"Hi, how are you?" Have you gotten them? So
Unfortunately, I have.
yeah, and so have I. So and again, that's psychology, because people, the hacker knows that if you send a message that sounds like there was a pre-existing conversation, it's gonna trigger people's curiosity. And what's curiosity? Is a psychological thing. So again, think about cybersecurity from the psychological and the human aspect and perspective, and not so much about the technology. The technology, leave that for the engineers and for those folks who are actually spending, most of the hours on the software part of things and technological part of things. But everything else is up to you.
It's definitely that I might be maybe a bit too harsh on I guess on like the on what certain businesses are doing, but sometimes I feel that certain businesses are just maybe a tad bit lazy when it comes to implementing cybersecurity measures. Like they just again completely see it as something that they don't want to. They see it completely as an expense, and they just get really lazy with it. But I do I will say that it unfortunately we see all those silly text messages of like, oh my gosh, like, hey, like, how are you doing? And then it's like usually some scammer trying to like be like some girl or guy, like whatever people are into nowadays. And especially when you see the even now, this is also cut. This is a little bit of a joke. Like when people say, "Oh, the economy screwed up," when now scammers are now texting you and saying, "Hey, do you want this $50 an hour remote job?" Instead of saying, "Oh, hot singles in your area." Like we're seeing the psychology of these hackers. They're really trying to like get at what people are looking at nowadays and trying to exploit that. And also, there was this one other thing that I did talk about with Assemblymember Khalil Anderson. It is snap card skimming that's happening. People are getting their snap cards, their EBT cards, and people are literally like just scamming money from that and stealing a lot of and stealing like hundreds, even thousands to an extent, and they're getting completely away with it, and that's actually hurting people who are poor, and that's what they need to have their families survive and basically provide for their families. Even the government needs to be extremely on top of cybersecurity, as it's hurting people not just from businesses but to people at the individual level like that. And threat actors don't really care about who they're targeting. They just care about if they can exploit something out of you. And we see it from anywhere from top corporations to people who are using EBT cards. So that's something that I feel that should increase people's aware, like their vigilance on, hey, like cybersecurity is actually a something that you need to be more concerned about nowadays, especially in the age of AI. I know that there's a lot of more AI generated cyber attacks. I don't know what's your thoughts on that and what the news has been covering on that lately.
Well, I think that's where I make an emphasis on speed because with AI, now you're able to not only increase your volume of targets, but also the speed. And folks, have to react to it. So that's why now speed is the name of the game, to be able to patch and to be able to address vulnerabilities in a speediest manner. And you do that also by using AI and other technologies because humanly it's not humanly possible to really compete with an AI an AI model, when you are comparing that one individual versus one that AI model.
Mm. One thing that I also did want to ask you about, because I know you have again, of course, a background in politics, but you also know about a lot about what's going on in Latin America. What is your opinion on, I guess, if there are different priorities in cybersecurity between the United States and what's going on in Latin America right now?
Well, believe it or not, I think the mentality is still very similar.
Hmm.
What do I need cybersecurity? It's a business expense as opposed to a business investment. So I think with more education and awareness, you know, people are eventually or are already really understanding that this is actually best practices and investment to include cybersecurity and AI into our operations as opposed to just an afterthought. And also, something I have to say is when we're talking about plainly AI and the benefits of AI and how AI can help expedite and make our operations more efficient, by definition, cybersecurity has to be involved with whenever you're using AI tools. From the human perspective about do not upload your social security number on a LLM, especially if the LLM is being, used for free. Avoiding the creation of shadow AI, for instance, where, folks in your organization are using unauthorized AI tools and they're using those unauthorized AI tools to process business information now that you created shadow AI in the organization. That's what it happens because things are happening in the shadows people don't know about. Your boss doesn't know about. So, but when you are able to really put together a mindset and a policy organization wide, people are beginning to catch on. Again, mentality, mindset, awareness, and all of that comes together when you just remind people, and people just they respond well to that. But with that actually takes me to another point that is important to emphasize, which is how a lot of these new practices, whether it's AI, an advanced technology, a new software, cybersecurity, so on and so forth, happens because leadership has to take the initiative to let people know and to encourage people to understand that these new tools and new practices have to be embraced. Um, so yeah, leadership have to definitely set the tone in new practices, especially when it comes down to technology or any practice whatsoever. Doesn't have to be technology related. Any new practice is usually, have to come from leadership and on AI and cybersecurity. leadership should be taking the leadership, the leading role, so folks understand at a more human and psychological level.
Okay, if you don't mind, I really did love what you said there, and if you're fine with it, of course, I would really love to get it in Spanish if for any of the Spanish speaking audience members that we do have a few listeners in Latin American countries, so if I can get a little segment of that in Spanish, if that's completely fine with you, of course.
Yeah. So you want me to say all of that in Spanish?
If if you're fine with it, because we have been getting
Yeah,
some
totally
new
fine.
okay.
I already let me remember what I said though. That's the thing,
Okay, no,
right?
no,
So
it's completely fine. If even if it's a much more quicker, condensed version of what you said, so we could clip
yeah.
it.
So and as we say in Spanish, it comes down to cybersecurity. Um, la ciberseguridad es un tema más psicológico y humano, y no tanto técnico. Y es porque la ciberseguridad tiene un aspecto de psicología en el cual si necesitas hacer mejores prácticas, por ejemplo, no subir tu seguro social o el número de tu tarjeta de crédito en una plataforma como Claude o ChatGPT, eso de ahí es más humano porque obviamente te tienes que entrenar y recordar de ti mismo que esas prácticas no son buenas por temas de seguridad de información y por ende uno no necesita tener un entrenamiento en código o ingeniería de desarrollo de tecnología, sino más un desarrollo y un concientización de que uno no tiene que subir información delicada en herramientas de AI, de IA, más especialmente cuando esas herramientas son herramientas que no son pagadas, porque eh, por ende cada vez que uno utiliza una herramienta pagada de inteligencia artificial, van a utilizar esa información para entrenar tu propia herramienta. ¿A qué voy? Y esto es algo importantísimo que se ve mucho en la industria tecnológica. Si uno no está pagando por una herramienta, si uno está usando una herramienta gratis, bueno, uno es el producto. La data de uno es el producto. Entonces, siempre hay que tener esa mentalidad que si uno utiliza algo gratis, siempre hay algo a cambio y eso es la data de uno. So what I was just saying in Spanish, and I didn't say this in English, is that especially when you're using any sort of, software and tools, technological tools, for free, you know, it is very true that when you're using something for free, and you're not paying for it, you are paying for it with your data. You are paying for it because you are the product when you're using a technological. So that's an important level of awareness that people need to understand when using a free.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. One thing that I again love what you said at the end was that it's all about like when you said that you are the product. There is no it goes again like that cyber there's no over investing in cybersecurity. It's not merely just an expense. And essentially that protecting you as a person and your business, making sure that the integrity of that it remains untouched is key. And also, one other fun thing that I've seen do with like especially like clipping is that it can get a clip of some guy who's like speaking complete just plain English, but now you can just do it in a whole bunch of other different languages as well, like Spanish. I've seen Hindi, Bengali, even Urdu on on Instagram and a whole other bunch of platforms. And I always thought that that was really cool.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool to see that. You can
um,
be talking to an AI model in English, and suddenly you can tell the same model, hey, talk to me on a different language. It will do it on the spot.
one of the things that because one thing that I've definitely noticed, especially in New York State, is that they're definitely passing a lot more laws in terms of in terms of what you see that's going on in the state legislation and like the state senate and the state assembly. I know they just passed the Raise Act earlier this year, and one of the cool
Mm,
things that I did see about it is that every major cybersecurity incident that is going to be that happens has to be reported to the state government in a 72-hour time period. And also, Kathy Hochul just signed on a data center moratorium. And if I could and if you have any thoughts on, I guess, like what the New York State government on a whole was like passing in terms of technology, and how like the federal government, they seem to be a lot more on the going in a bit of an opposite direction in terms of they want more AI deregulation, especially in terms of a lot of people are talking about the AI race against China and other countries, and they want to make sure that the U.S. stays on top. Some people think that the U.S. will still be fine because we do have a partnership with Taiwan, and we're getting a lot of those chips from there. But if you have any thoughts or opinions on like what's going on with AI in terms of like what laws are being passed on the state and federal level, I would really love to hear it.
yeah, I mean, when you're looking at the Race Act, when you're looking at these regulations about disclosing any cybercrime, it's good practice, and I think the state is being consistent with that because there's another law, not so much on AI from the AI perspective, but more from the cybersecurity perspective, where if this is the law called the Shield Act, and it's the state law, cybersecurity law that passed just back in 2020, I believe, 20, about 5 years ago, and they have a very similar model of disclosing an AI incident, when it happens. So that's cybersecurity law, and then on the race side, which is purely more from the AI perspective, I like that consistency there, and when it comes down to the AI regulation, in some states, and the completely AI deregulation on some states and nationwide, especially at the federal level. That's definitely just showcase how priorities are different in different parts of the country. So again, for me, at least from the consumer point of view, regular folks and businesses, certainly AI is one of those things that we just need to make sure that we have good practices. Um, so that and I totally believe, and we do this all the time. There is a way to balance out AI efficiency with security. A lot of people get it wrong. That's why they call us. But realistically speaking, it's one of those things that can be done.
Because one thing that I definitely saw that was interesting. I mean, personally, I think that smart regulation should exist because we do need guardrails, especially in the events, to make sure that hey, we need to make sure that companies are following certain protocols to protect their integrity from bad actors. But in terms of also, I guess, like regulation. Some critics have definitely brought up the fact that maybe having to follow all those certain rules and guidelines are a bit expensive and kind of hurts people who are like in the small businesses and or newer companies that are trying to um, come up, and that it actually helps more larger companies because they can afford to adhere to those regulations. It's easier for them to gain control of the competition. What is if you have any thoughts on those concerns that I have heard various social media posts and conversations that I've had with some people.
Tell me more about it so I can give you my perspective.
Okay. For example, like let's say I'm gonna be very broad about it, but like let's say Anthropic in terms of having to adhere to various AI regulations and rules because they're a large company. They can afford to adhere to certain things about AI safety, and they can follow certain like compliance rules and all that, while as a small business can't. But if you want to jump to another topic, that's completely fine. It was just stuff that I was like hearing around, and I wanted to just see if that was something that you had any thoughts on, because I thought that was interesting. This is something I
So you're
heard
saying
very
like
recently.
laws and regulations that apply for big businesses may not translate into small businesses, roughly. Is
Yeah,
that what it?
that was some. I'm not necessarily saying that. That was just something that I just heard around in terms of like some concerns that some people were having.
I mean, and the concerns are valid. For instance, something that I think is positive is when you look at the New York Shield Act, the language of the law says use reasonable safeguards to protect information, yada, yada, yada. So the word reasonable is a scalable word, like the same reasonable safeguards that a big company will need to protect information will not be the same as a small company. So a lot of that, the concerns are there and the concerns are valid. So it's just coming down to what's the actual law saying, what's the language on the law. And not only that, but also how is that communicating with the regular audience, with the regular population. And I don't believe that government really is the best at communicating oftentimes. And I think that's one of those things that we just need to take, a little bit more initiative on understanding what the law says. I'm not saying we need to hire a lawyer for every single thing, but, you know, attention is one of those things that are the most important in this time, in the times we live in, you know? So just paying attention is very important. As despite how busy we are, we always it's always important to put a little bit more value and priority into how to use AI the best safe way.
Is there any, I guess, certain concerns that you would love to see some like brought up in the state legislation, or even in Congress at a federal level? Because you are someone who has spent a long time as a lobbyist, seeing what gets moved in the in legislation, and also what doesn't. Are there any like certain concerns that you would like to see brought up, especially given your background?
Really wonder whether the size of these data centers have to be that gigantic, because there are studies you know that discusses and debate whether the size of data centers have to be that massive. And it sounds like you don't have to. Now, I don't know enough on that is on that end. So really understanding a little bit more why that's the reason, and really coming to a more realistic, uh, and more friendly, you know, perspective of developing these type of data centers and how efficient they are with consuming natural resources. That's another issue. So it's one of those things where I just want to understand more if what we are told are the the right things, and if not, what are the right things? So a lot of questions around it.
Hmm. I mean, we did at least in New York State, we did pass a data center moratorium where basically it's a complete halt on data centers being implemented in the state for those who are watching, and at least would you say that it's a good thing that those are being paused, or would you say that it's hurting advancement in the state because obviously there's both sides to it. And I know data centers, there's obviously like there are pros and cons because with the age of artificial intelligence we are having a an AI boom where data centers are going to be needed. There's no stopping that in the country. But in terms of, I guess, whether it's an environmental hazard for local communities, whether it's contributing to the rising cost of expenses that are happening, there is always like, I guess, like a pros and cons to it happening. And there are people who will say that, oh, data centers, like especially the hype around it nowadays, yes, it's not necessarily the most ideal for local communities, but there is much more damaging things that are going around. For example, like if I remember this statistic, I'm pulling it off at the top of my head. Data centers, like the average data center will take about like 30 to 50 I guess like billion gallons of water, but a golf course takes about 500 billion. So like in terms of like what's the lesser evil, like, oh, like everyone's hyping up data centers, but no one's really talking all about golf courses and how bad they are for the environment. What would your what would you say that, I guess, like in terms of data centers, like we should continue to be a bit more skeptical of it, or should we um
Always,
listen to?
always being skeptical of everything. I mean, ask the right questions. That's my mantra to everybody. I'm not saying be contrarian. That's a different extreme. But just question, like, are things the way that they should be and why? And then make your own conclusion. If it makes sense, sure, I'll go with it. If it doesn't make sense, then trying to find a better way.
It's all about the psychology of the cybersecurity mindset. You always have to be skeptical of everything, but
Yeah,
not that.
critical thinking.
Yes.
You're seeing judgment. You're seeing you're seeing always using judgment.
Okay,
You
because
know, we all have
especially
brains. We all have thinking.
because like with the topic of data centers, it was always something that largely interested me for a while, and there's a lot of stuff that I've been learning, but also I see how much I don't know, seeing a lot of people's different opinions, and I'm doing my best to be sure to learn and take everyone's, I guess, approach on this topic, and also take it with a grain of salt, but also understand the perspectives of where they're coming from. Because I understand that, hey, we want to have like advancement in artificial intelligence, and we want to make sure that we people also bring up the AI race and going up against China and various foreign countries, and making sure that the United States is definitely leading on in that field. But then there's also like, hey, we also have to care about the environment and our local communities. So it's always kind of like, I remember I heard this quote from an old economics professor of mine back when I was in Queens College. Shout out to CUNY. That's in life there was trade offs, and with data centers, I largely see it like, okay, what are you trading off? Like, do you want to focus more on like, oh, advancement and in terms of like technologies, or but also do you want to focus more like, hey, we have to help out the people that we live with? So it's all about, I guess, like I know it sounds like very nuanced and everyone's gonna say it, but like at least for me right now, it's about like finding that balance in terms of like what we prioritize. And I guess it might vary on location to location. And definitely when you brought up earlier, like, why should the size of data centers be so large? It should be, there definitely needs to be like certain rules, and going back again, having smart regulation on these.
Yeah, I think everything comes down to nuances. There are trade-off and there are trade-off. So we need to look at the spectrum for things to make sense, and obviously that's on a case-by-case basis.
No, it's all good. It's all good. It's definitely something that I've been learning about a lot more, but also I see like the gap in it's like, that quote, like the more for like the more you know, the more you don't know. It's kind of like when Socrates said, "I know that I know nothing." And I guess that's what also I feel like in terms of like in technology, like in terms of cloud and cybersecurity, especially with like it like when you're looking at through your when you're learning about managing your IT infrastructure, or when you're learning more about security protocols, the more I learn, the more I just I realize there's so much for me to learn more, and that's why I love having people like you on the podcast. So I guess like me and the audience that listens can just take the time to learn more, and overall just being being on that journey of being a in a way a forever student. You're just always constantly learning and growing as a person.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true for anything, right? You always gotta
Yeah.
keep going and learning.
Yeah, well, I definitely would love to what's your thoughts, I guess, on like the terms of like cyber stoicism or something like that, because I know we're always talking about like, oh, you have to be like, in terms of we have to be thinking critically and be vigilant about everything that's going on. But what's your, I guess, like your thoughts on that term of like cyber stoicism?
It's funny you ask that because cyber stoicism is essentially, borrowing the same philosophy from stoicism, which I love. And one of those principles are control, separate real threats from panic. What's under your control, your panic, the way that you respond things. What's not in your control, external threats. I think a good one is, for instance, when you're developing a software
Hmm.
and then that software has um, vulnerabilities. It is under your control to really address those vulnerabilities. It's not under your control to address the threats outside in the environment. So what are you under control with? What you can control. Vulnerabilities.
Yes.
Discipline, always stay, you know, um, consistent with learning new things and really strengthening your position. So for me, it comes down to refinement as opposed to starting from scratch every single time a new vulnerability or a new attack starts. That's just not practical. But when you refine and you evolve, not revolve, but evolve, then that's a more practical way of living. So with those core principles in mind.
Mm, awesome. Thank you so much. And to definitely close off like right before we close off, where can people find you? For anyone who's listening into the audience, where can they find you and get in contact with you?
Yeah, we're pretty active on LinkedIn. You can look at Affila Technology on LinkedIn. You'll find us. And then our website, www at affilatechnology.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure to plug it in the links. Thank you again so much, and Andres. Thank you again for coming on. I had a great time learning and talking about cybersecurity with you, especially you coming from a political and politics background, which I also love. So it was really interesting, and also I had a great time learning about the cross section of how both intersect, and your background from going in, especially coming from an immigrant background, coming to New York City, which I'm also from and born and raised, and I come from an immigrant background. I mean, an immigrant family as well, and then see coming from CUNY to government, and then to going to cybersecurity. I think it was an amazing background, and keep doing great stuff with the Affila Technology Group. And thank you again for joining. I really do appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me, Moses. Look
Of
forward
course.
to, speaking again.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye bye.